So this is some work that I've been involved in for the last 15 years, really, and it came about by chance, really, as I was traveling through the north of Pakistan, which is my ancestral roots, and which actually produces a large amount of the surgical instruments supplied to the world, 70% in fact. And that was where my interest in this started. So I'm going to start this talk by taking you, first of all, to Pakistan and describing some of the problems. So this town in the north of Pakistan is called Sialkot. It produces, as I've mentioned already, 70% of the world's surgical instruments. 100 million instruments at least every single year are produced there, 10,000 different types. And these are distributed to health systems all over the world, certainly coming into the UK, certainly going into the US. Actually, I'm pretty sure the vast majority of countries in the world are purchasing these instruments. The working conditions are perhaps not ideal. A lot of the production occurs in small workshops to start with. There are 13 stages in the production of surgical instruments, and some of these workshops actually have really poor working conditions, what we might call sweatshop labor. So there's 50,000 laborers working in this industry in this town, and they are working, as I've shown, in these sorts of working conditions. So even whilst I was standing here, this gentleman dropped this hot metal onto his foot, and these sorts of injuries are not unusual. These people are paid a piece rate. They will work typically 13 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they'll work on other dangerous areas. So grinding wheels, it's not unusual for injuries to occur, for people to get injuries to digits, even to lose digits, even for entire arms to be torn off. And in this area, these people are paid a piece rate. So they don't have regular employment. A lot of them are paid if they turn up for work. So at times, of course, things may be difficult. At times, you may be unwell and you need actually money for going to the hospital or to a health facility. You may need money to be borrowed because you can't work and you need food on the table. So a lot of these workers become indebted to the factory owners, actually, and will end up working and being trapped in this area. In the worst incidents I've heard, there was even a worker who was chained to the wall so that he would not leave to make sure he paid off his debt. There are other reports of workers being beaten with sticks. There's other risks as well associated with this. These are some chemicals for the electroplating towards the end of the production of the surgical instruments. And there are other products being made. These are laryngoscope blades, which unfortunately a lot of the world uses disposable laryngoscope blades, something we certainly all need to think about, whether that's actually in any way justified, but they are manufactured cheaply in this area. So these people are not paid a living wage. They typically earn between $1 and $2 a day, which is not an adequate wage even by Pakistan standards. Electrosurgical products as well. Of the 50,000 labourers, we don't have accurate data, but we think several thousand of them are children. We know that several thousand of them are children. So children would typically start working in this industry at the age of 12, but there are children as young as 7. And as you can see, this is not the sort of work that we would ideally want children to be involved in, if any work at all. It's dangerous. So the issue of child labour is always a motive, but child labour is a symptom of a wider problem with protecting workers in their work. So we've interviewed some of these children, though, and what you find is that the vast majority of them don't have any opportunity to go to school. They will work typically 6 days a week. They will also work long hours, typically up to 8 hours a day. They hate this work. They complain of muscle aches, of pains. They don't want to do this work. They want to go and play cricket in the streets with their friends. They want to go to school. As I say, this is a symptom of a wider problem with not protecting workers and valuing and respecting workers in our supply chains. And these are all goods that we are buying. I'd like to think that it was just related to surgical instrument manufacture, but actually there are other problems. So I'd like to take you to Malaysia now. Malaysia produces between 70 and 80% of the world's gloves. And it's become a bit of a hot topic, of course, during the pandemic, but this was an issue that I highlighted together with others in 2016, where we found there were problems in some of the manufacture of gloves. And it was really only later on in 2018 that there were media reports around the world, but particularly from the UK, in a newspaper called The Guardian, which reported on this issue. And I'd like to take you to, first of all, the largest glove company in the world, which is Top Glove, which produces around at least 2 billion gloves every single year across this huge complex of 29 factories. And in fact, in Malaysia, there are a number of these factories that are producing. And if you look inside the factories, things look okay. But in fact, when you go behind the scenes, it tells a slightly different story. As is common in Malaysia, the vast majority of laborers in this industry are immigrants coming from countries such as Bangladesh, Nepal, Indonesia. And they come with this opportunity for great employment and opportunity to send money back home and to make an income. But the realities are actually quite different. These immigrant workers are promised lots. This is an advert that says that in Nepal, saying you will get a free visa, a free ticket, free accommodation. It sounds too good to be true. You just need to come along to this glove factory and you will earn a lot of money and go home affluent. The realities are these recruitment agents suddenly say actually that there are some costs associated. Of course, you have to pay for this little check to check you're okay. You have to pay for your flights, of course. You have to pay for various other charges that are levied. In Nepal, a lot of the workers will pay about $1,000 in the end, and a lot of them will sell land for this opportunity to earn a lot. In Bangladesh, where people are even more desperate, and to be frank, where the systems for recruitment are even more corrupt, they may pay up to $5,000. In fact, we know of several workers that have paid $5,000. The problem is that when they arrive, it's not quite as they had hoped. So these are some workers arriving at Top Glove and everything seems okay. But certainly historically, these workers would typically work 3 months without a single day off, working 12 to 13 hours a day of compulsory overtime without additional pay. And it's hard work. The temperatures of burning of hot latex can be up to 50 degrees Celsius, and there's machinery as well. But what's more important is the way these workers are treated. So if we look, here's a worker having a disagreement with the management, and this is all immigrant workers on the workshop floor and Malaysian supervisors. And unfortunately, there's a culture of treating immigrant workers in a different way, shall we say. There's actually company policy here up the top there. You can see if you do decide to disrupt what they call sabotage, so you complain, you'll be fined at least close to a month's salary. And if you do it a second time, you will definitely forfeit a month's salary. If you do it a third time, you'll be sent home. And all that money that you have paid, you will definitely not be able to pay that back. Usually the passports of these workers are also confiscated, so they can't leave the compound, the factory compound, because it's illegal to leave the factory compound without a passport. And there are deductions for accommodation, which is provided by the factory, but which is obligatory, and also meals, which are provided by the factory, which is obligatory to pay for. These are all indicators of what is called forced labor by the International Labour Organization. It is trapping people so they cannot leave and forcing them to work and to make payments and take on huge debts. The accommodation that they live in is also not voluntary and not the sort of standards we would hope. So these is actually one of the better accommodations, but they will live typically 24 to a single room in bunk beds, no privacy. These are actually good bunk beds. They've got a mattress. There are others where they will sleep on a wooden board, and there are people who sleep on the concrete floor. Up to 24 sharing a toilet in some of this accommodation, and cooking facilities are woefully inadequate. This is widespread in the gloves in these accommodations. Here's another company that was highlighted just a few months ago called Brightway. We know that these gloves are also going all over the world, and including to the UK, but also to many other countries. And these workers were living in shipping containers, which is obviously woefully inadequate as well. And there are reports of real serious abuse of some of these workers who are trapped living in these shipping containers in intolerable heat at times. So I've given you some examples, but actually I've given you examples of Top Glove and Brightway, who are major glove manufacturers. Now, you may not have heard of these brand names, but I can tell you they will be manufacturing for all your brand names. These are rebranded and sold on to countries under different brand names. So Top Glove actually supplies a huge number of companies, 150 countries it supplies to. They're definitely coming into your health system. I would be surprised if they're not. So I've highlighted those two companies, but actually WRP is another major supplier. They had temperatures of up to 70 degrees Celsius and the same problems of migrant workers who have taken huge debts on, passports confiscated, not allowed to leave. And all these other companies in Malaysia have been highlighted as having exactly the same problems. Migrant workers used under forced labor conditions, and some horrendous stories that I'm actually not allowed to share because I've been told those in confidence. I'd like to take you to masks now. Now, masks may be produced in different areas and obviously quite topical. A few years ago, in fact, a decade ago, I went to a factory in Mexico that produces masks, and it looks okay. They're producing the filters on a machine, but actually the actual threading of the mask is a manual task, and has moved in this factory to home workers. So rather than being produced in the factory, people will work at home. And here is a home worker. He's called Miguel, and Miguel will typically thread around 3,000 masks a week. And the reason this is done is because the factory owner said, I can't afford to pay these workers the benefits they get from working in the factory, such as social security and those sorts of payments. As a result, these workers have to work at home. They get paid a piece rate, so if they're ill, they don't get paid. If they're ill, they'll get other family members to try and help out to make ends meet. So here's some children actually collecting these filters to take home and work on. And more recently in the pandemic, we've had issues, as actually reported by the New York Times, of a factory in Xinjiang province in China that's producing masks, which have come to multiple health systems in the US, but also into the UK. And what we find there is that these workers in this factory, a lot of them were Uyghur. Hopefully, perhaps many of you know the basic cultural genocide is having of the Uyghur population. Uyghur is a group that have been forced to work in and assimilate into the mainstream Chinese society. They have to learn Han Chinese. They have to pledge allegiance to the flag. And they don't, to be honest, this is absolutely forced labor. They don't really have a choice. They are monitored and their relatives are monitored. And we are funding this by buying these masks from China. So I'll not take you somewhere else. I'll take you to China again, but this is in a different province. This is called Dandong. This is on the border with Korea. And here were some gowns that were being sourced for the pandemic and being produced in a city on the border of North Korea and China. And what was found there was that these North Korean workers were all sent on by the state and were working under forced labor. Between 70 and 100% of their salaries was deducted and sent to the North Korean state. So this is state-sponsored forced labor that we in the NHS, unfortunately, as well as other health systems, have been funding. So the scale of this problem is difficult to ascertain with certainty, but I know that a number of goods are produced all in a number of different countries. And what we find is when we surveyed these countries, we find that around half of our products are produced under high-risk labour conditions. I'm not going to talk about this because actually in session 8, there will be some research presented related to this. So I encourage some of you to join that session if possible. But it seems to be a widespread problem. So what are the solutions? It's complex because supply chains are difficult. This is the groups that I've set up to try and work through these issues. but we have workers, we have manufacturers, we have suppliers. The suppliers may well be very different to the manufacturers because they're rebranded, and it's a complex process. In procurement, we have health systems that have huge fragmented supply chains. So trying to get coordination there is not easy. But also at the supplier level, you may think, for example, you're buying a glove from for example, for Ansell, produced in an Ansell factory, and that may be true, but actually we found out during this mechanism that actually all these other manufacturers also manufacture gloves for Ansell when required. And then looking at the manufacturers, the distribution chains are huge. So this is Top Glove's own data showing where they send the gloves. They send the gloves all over the world under different brand names. But we can work on this. So we recognize end users as advocates, and we've created some guidance for them. We have procurers. We've been working with in the NHS supply chain. Contract clauses were introduced for these very high-risk products, amounted to £250 million. This was a requirement to embed ethical labour conditions into purchasing contracts. And indeed, this was mirrored in Norway, Sweden, and Scotland. And it all looks great. You have these ticks and these audits that will check everything, but actually we found that it's fake. Coaching is often used during audits, falsification of audits, selective reporting of what you want to do, measuring the wrong measures, such as whether you've got fire extinguishers rather than measures such as are you respected at work. So the evidence is that audits can help to recognize the problem, but don't actually offer the solution. And what we need is remediation, representation, the power to be given back to the workers so that they have rights. And I'm working with a number of organizations to try and disentangle these incredible complexities and come up with solutions. So I'm going to finish now by talking about some outcomes that we've had. So going back to surgical instruments, what we found there is there are indeed some changes as a result of some procurement. Some companies are definitely improving things and workers are happier, but we still have the same problems outside of those factories under regulations. And in terms of gloves, we've seen protests occurring across multiple factories as a result of the media work. There's been a real highlight on the hostel accommodation as a result of COVID outbreaks in this, and the Malaysian ministry is now making these sorts of living accommodation illegal. And as a result of pressure and media interest, the US Customs and Border Protection has actually banned import of two major glove manufacturers, which has led to a field change. And actually we're starting to see remediation of payments, huge payouts to workers for the money that they have paid, up to 25 million paid out by Top Glove, which has really changed its attitude. So it's work in progress, but we find that these gloves are still coming into the health service, certainly in the UK. These are all acquired during the pandemic. So there's still much more work to do. I'd like to stop there and thank you for your time.